You know, I have been so disappointed by how many politicians have stayed silent while our farmers are robbed of irrigation water and robbed of that water in a drought. And all on the basis of the most shonky green science. I'm talking about the farmers of the Murray-Darling, where 40% of our food by value is grown. Our federal government has given the Murray-Darling Basin Authority $10 billion just to buy water from those farmers and flush it down the river. And one of the main reasons for that is to keep the giant lakes at the end of the Murray, Alexandrina and Albert, fresh rather than salty from the sea. But as I showed a couple of weeks ago, keeping that lake fresh is based on one claim from one paper in 2009 by 3 scientists that insisted the majority of the lake, Alexandrina, has been fresh for its entire history. There you go, we should keep it that way. Yet a former colleague of those 3 scientists said that all worked on another paper just 2 years earlier that said the exact opposite. The lakes had been salty. And he said the 3 scientists presented no new evidence to explain why they'd changed their mind. Joining me is Nationals Party Whip Damian Drum. Damian, it's great to see you. First of all, should farmers' water be used to keep these naturally salty lakes fresh?
Well, I don't think. I think this new thing that's come out now with the scientists now effectively saying that the 2007 report was doctored to effectively flip its whole meaning in 2009, and then if that 2009 report was the science that we used to put in place all the respective quantities of water. The 2750 that was taken out of agriculture and moved into the environment, the 450 up water, the 605 that came across for the SDLs, then I think if that was the science that was used to create those quantities of water that has to come out of ag, then yes, we need to have another look at that. And we need to look at different quantities because now the science is different.
You know, you said the word doctored. I'll say that the scientists reached a different conclusion to the one 2 years earlier without explaining exactly why they'd completely flipped their mind to go against the consensus. But anyway, Damian Drum, why... Look, I'm really glad to hear you take this on, right? Why do you think so few other politicians have gone to the basics and saying, why on earth are we doing something so silly?
Well, I'll flip it back at you, Andrew. I'll say why, in fact, there's so few mainstream media outlets have been letting this drought go without any interest in it at all. And the vast majority of mainstream media outlets have been more interested in fish kills, in the health of our fish population, than they've been in the health of our farmers. So whilst I'm happy to come here and to be loud and vocal about this issue, I'm also delighted that you've picked up the chase. Only last week the ABC finally picked up the chase, and you know, there's been a few others out there that have been fantastic in relation, but very, very few. So I don't know why we haven't had more of an outrage about this 2009 report. That only 2 or 3 words were subtly changed, but the whole meaning of the history of the lower lakes was changed with that slight that terminology that was changed over. So to try and tell Australia that the lower lakes of Alexandrina and Albert have been estuarine never, and that they've been fresh always, is clearly wrong. And we need to have the Murray-Darling Basin Authority come out and acknowledge that.
Look, I couldn't agree with you more, but there's one other point about why this is so crazy. Lake Alexandrina is so vast, it's huge, and it's so shallow and it's so warm that it loses an enormous amount of that farmer's water through evaporation, with 900 megalitres a year. Isn't that water that farmers could and should be putting to better use?
Yeah, so it's 800 to 900 gigalitres, which is 1,000 times more than what you just said. So,
oh, sorry,
if
I apologise.
Just say, well, even if we're conservative and we call it 800 gigalitres, that's about $480 million worth of water. That is productive agricultural water if it was retained further upstream. For it to flow into Lake Alexandrina and evaporate, that's a loss to productivity of around just under $500 million on today's figures. Now, the water in the Murray-Darling Basin system is not always going to be as expensive as it is today. However, on today's figures, you're talking about $500 million of water that, under the regime we currently have, will evaporate from the lower lakes this summer.
That's just a crying shame in a drought. And just lastly, Damian, more wasted water. Every year, the Murray-Darling Basin Authority also sends what it calls a winter fresh down the Murray, a flood of water over a month that's happening about now that is meant to help the environment by, most importantly, apparently, helping plants on the riverbanks to propagate. Now, is that actually a smart use of water? Why can't you just, at a fraction of the cost, just hire a few unemployed people to plant rather than just leave it to the water?
Well, again, it's a 100 gigalitre flow, and this 100 gigalitre flow that's going down the moment is going down the Goulburn River in my hometown, 100 yards away from where I live. And you're right, there are some very clear signs of degradation and erosion, and I'm sure there has to be other ways, rather than throwing down $60 million worth of water to try and propagate the banks. I mean, the banks are effectively fully vegetated right now. You can see where the damage is, but it's only in very, very select areas. I'm sure we could have another approach that didn't use $60 million worth of water to fix up the vegetation on the side of the banks. There's also the benefit, apparently, where this $60 million worth of winter fresh flows is going to help with the fish population, and it's going to help with the fish breeding of some of our natural fish species. But again, it comes down to, Andrew, where we've created this mess, and it just seems now, right now, when water has been, not at the middle of winter, but certainly in the autumn, when we were crying out, absolutely crying out for water from the environment.
So true.
And it just seems that fish has now become the health of fish has now become far more important than the health of our farmers. And this is where the real crime is.
You've said it, fish above farmers. I think we need to rework that equation. Damian Drum, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.